I will now turn things over to Tim Drake, Vice President of Regulatory Policy and Public Affairs with ITS America, to get us started.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to extend a welcome to all of the ITS America members who are able to join us today for what will be our fourth Federal Update webinar in our COVID-19 response series. Today, you will hear from me, as well as Ron Thaniel, our Vice President of Legislative Affairs, and Amy Ford, the Director of the Mobility on Demand Alliance. During this webinar, we will provide a summary of the House HEROES Act, as well as updates on our policy development efforts at ITS America and the 5.9 gigahertz safety spectrum band issue. I'll begin by providing a short overview of where we are in the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. So first, a quick overview of COVID-19 in the US by the numbers. To date, we've had more than 1.56 million confirmed COVID-19 cases, with over 92,250 deaths. Additionally, over 36 million unemployment claims have been filed over the last 2 months, and the unemployment rate increased to 14.7% in April. Needless to say, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on our nation's economy and the transportation industry. Next slide. Many states across the country have taken steps to reopen the country. Washington Post reported yesterday that all 50 states will have taken some action to lift restrictions prior to this weekend. The impact on transportation could be significant. As the country begins to move towards reopening, there will be a number of impacts. On our roadways, there's concern that reopening will significantly increase congestion due to a reduction in transit ridership. The thinking is that more commuters and other trips are likely to use single occupancy vehicles rather than buses or rail. Additionally, there has been a benefit to air quality as vehicle miles traveled has dropped significantly in the last 2 months. However, these gains in air quality are not as significant as some predicted and are likely to be reversed when the economy reopens. In China, which has reopened recently, they're currently seeing higher air pollution levels than the same time last year. Next slide. Transit agencies across the country have been transporting essential workers and passengers for essential trips throughout the crisis, and they are additionally preparing for reopening. Transit agencies have been installing driver shields, requiring rear door entry, requiring the use of masks, and increasing service and limiting capacity to ensure social distancing requirements can be adhered to. The CDC recently published guidance for reopening the economy, which covered a number of areas, including mass transit. For transit, the CDC recommends focusing on hygiene, including hand washing, the wearing of masks, social distancing, and enhanced cleaning and disinfecting of transit vehicles. Additionally, some cities and states are seeking to combat an expected increase in congestion and reduction in air quality by focusing on things such as enhancing bike lanes and closing certain vehicles to road traffic. Or certain roads to vehicle traffic, sorry. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this is the fourth webinar in our COVID response series. First, we will hear a summary of the House HEROES Act. Second, we will provide a summary of our policy development efforts. And then we will provide an update on the 5.9 gigahertz band proposal. At this time, I'd like to introduce Ron Thaniel, our Vice President of Legislative Affairs, who will provide us an overview of the HEROES Act.
Great, thank you, Tim. It's good to be here today with you and ITS America's members for our fourth COVID-19 response to legislation update. Let's start the Legislative Affairs update with a letter from ITS America's President and CEO, Shailen Bhatt, that was sent to the House and Senate leadership on May 11th. The letter states ITSA's support for additional COVID-19 emergency assistance for transportation sectors represented by the association, including flexibility of federal dollars to deploy transportation technologies. In summary, the letter calls for funding to keep our nation's transportation system solvent, flexible funding to offset the loss in revenues for states and local transit agencies and transit, maintain loan and grant programs to assist the transportation sector, flexibility with federal funds to deploy technology to stop the spread of COVID-19, maintain reductions in greenhouse gases achieved during the stay-at-home orders by increasing investment to support vehicle electrification, increase funding in smart infrastructure and vehicle research, flexibility to deploy life-saving technologies to better protect pedestrians and cyclists, and also reinstate the employer fringe benefits for cycling commuting. The letter closes by speaking to the role that technology is playing to address the COVID-19 crisis, including technology designed to slow the spread of COVID-19, as well as technologies designed to improve system performance, especially as the US economy reopens. We received confirmation from Speaker Pelosi's office that the letter was received. And so I urge you to go to our website, itsa.org, to review the letter in detail. Next slide. Okay. Last week, May 15th, the House passed the $3 trillion Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act, or the HEROES Act. This is the fifth COVID-19 response bill since March. Let's start with a recap. The first bill, the coronavirus supplemental bill, provides $8.3 billion for health agencies, testing, small businesses, and loans to subsidies for small businesses, and assistance to help states and local governments. The second bill, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, includes $100 billion for employers offering paid sick leave, increases the unemployment benefits, and a refundable tax credit for sick leave for self-employed individuals. The third bill, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, includes $2 trillion in assistance to transportation, businesses, states, and most important for many Americans, checks to households. The fourth bill, the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act, includes $484 billion for small businesses, hospitals, and COVID-19 testing. The fifth bill, the HEROES Act, passed the House on a bipartisan vote, 208 to 199. It includes more than $30 billion for state transportation agencies and public transit at a 100% federal match, as well as emergency assistance for FAA operations, state and local governments, additional funding for payroll protection program, testing and tracing, just to name a few areas. Democratic leadership described the bill as a comprehensive coronavirus response bill that will meet the challenges this pandemic poses to our nation. It is an extremely broad piece of legislation. Next slide. Okay, let's speak to the HEROES Act transportation funding for state transportation agencies. The bill provides nearly $15 billion to state transportation departments by formula funding. It largely uses the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program eligibility to provide funding at a 100% federal share to cover operational, maintenance, administrative expenses, including salaries of employees or contractors and information technology needs. It would apply a 100% federal match to the FY 2020 funds that have not been obligated when this bill if this bill goes into effect, enactment. Key point here is that the state DOTs and ITS America, we support this as well as AASHTO. They continue to call for $50 billion in emergency assistance with federal dollars treated as state dollars, which will provide maximum flexibility. Next slide. Okay. Transit. The HEROES Act provides $15.75 billion for transit. Funds are available for both operating expenses and capital expenses, similar to the CARES Act. The federal share for the grants, similar to the highway dollars, 100%. Also, the bill provides within that category $11.74 billion in formula funds to the largest urbanized areas with a population over 3 million. 85% of the funds are distributed by the State of Good Repair formula. 15% of the funds are distributed by the urbanized area formula. In addition, there is $4 billion in emergency relief grants to maintain essential transit services. As for the CARES Act, the bill does not allow the US DOT to waive prevailing wage and labor standards. It does require the largest transit agencies, and Tim referenced this, to require passengers to wear face masks or coverings while on board vehicles. I want to remind you the transit agencies received $25 billion in the CARES Act. The American Public Transportation Association, also known as APTA, is calling for an additional $24 billion in emergency assistance. And also there's a new coalition of very large transit agencies. They are calling for an additional $32 billion in emergency assistance. Next slide. State and local government assistance. And the Speaker has been very clear for weeks now, Speaker Pelosi, that her priority is to get urgent assistance to states and cities. HEROES Act includes $500 billion for states and also the District of Columbia upon enactment, and an additional $250 billion by May 3rd of 2021. As far as local assistance, it provides $250 billion through the Community Development Block Grant Program, and then a year from now, an additional $125 billion as well. Next slide. So the outlook. As Congress debates future COVID-19 response bills, differing priorities are making consensus much more difficult. The White House continues to focus on payroll tax cuts, which have been met with lukewarm support by House and Senate leaders in both parties. Democrats, as we have seen in the HEROES Act, they continue to push for emergency assistance to states and localities, funding to test, trace, and treat people with COVID-19, food assistance, direct payments. And you know, the thinking is at this point that the HEROES Act will go nowhere in the Senate. And speaking to the Senate, Majority Leader McConnell is focused on including liability protections in the next COVID-19 response bill. Next slide. Okay, infrastructure. While there continues to be bipartisan support for an infrastructure bill, timing has slipped, with Senate Republican leadership calling for a pause on further relief packages. Currently, Republicans and Democrats are at odds over the size, the substance, and need for another aid package. The focus now seems to be timed with the expiration of the CARES Act unemployment benefits, which would be the end of July. And of course, depending on the state of the economy, the question is, do you need another COVID-19 response bill? If there is a need, the economy is not recovering as we all hope it will, that very well could bring the parties together again to pass a much larger COVID-19 relief bill that could include an infrastructure package as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this back to Tim Drake to take us into the policy development update.
Sorry, I think I was on mute there. Ron, I'm going to ask you to stay on and help me with this one. So we at ITS America have been developing our policy and priorities related to both the COVID economic response legislation as well as FAST Act reauthorization, particularly as we see some robust bills being advanced in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee and considered by the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And particularly, we're working with the Smart Infrastructure Task Force here in ITS America, as well as the Mobility on Demand Alliance. I know we've held several conference calls with the Smart Infrastructure Task Force over the last few weeks. Ron, if you'd like to discuss those calls and talk about the outcomes of that.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Yes, the Smart Infrastructure Task Force, led by John Barton with HNTB and Tilly Chang with the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, led an exercise that covered essentially 3 weeks, where it's really a listening tour of our members to find out what their COVID-19 related transportation needs were. And so based on that process, which covered 3 weeks, we're now moving into essentially sector level conversations based on the themes that came from that conversation. Many of the themes were included in the letter that went to the House and Senate. These themes we already have policy on. We also have themes through this process that we don't currently have policy on. But either way, what will happen is over the next number of weeks, Tim, the policy team, we will host sector level calls, similar to what we did with the FAST Act reauthorization last year, because we're interested in building policy around these key themes. And the first set of policy sector calls will focus on the state DOTs. And then after that, we will have a conversation with the cities, transit, counties, MPOs. Following that will be a conversation with automakers, auto safety groups, insurance members. We will have a call with our engineering and consulting members, mobility on demand, technology, and we will close this with a conversation with our research universities. And so the hope is that we can get this done by the first or second week of June. It's an ambitious schedule. I think we do have some flexibility, but we want to make sure that as Congress, they do come together and infrastructure bill is pulled together, that we want to make sure that our policies are included. Any questions, Tim? I think that covers it.
I think that's good. Elizabeth, you can go to the next slide. And Ron, do you want to run through the themes that we developed?
Sure.
For the task force?
Yeah, I'm happy to go through those themes. So the themes are in front of you on the slide. And these are the key themes. As I point out, some of these themes were included in the letter that we sent to the Hill. But the first theme is, number one, offset the revenue losses at state, city, and county departments of transportation, public transit, public tolling authorities. Second theme is deploy technology to reduce equity barriers facing transportation users with near historic levels of unemployment. We have a number of members really taking effort on developing that policy. That includes Michigan DOT, Cubic Transportation Systems, and I know we have a couple other members as well. And so I think that will be a very interesting piece. This will be very new. We don't have policy on the concept of a mobility wallet yet, but we do believe that it's something in light of the needs that we have in this country with COVID-19. The ability to have some kind of payment platform will be very attractive. We also want to make sure that that is available to low-income communities as well. So developing that, again, Cubic and Michigan DOT have really led the efforts on that. Third one is support greater use of technology to protect transit workers from COVID-19. That is a very, very sad story with many sad stories around COVID-19. The number of transit workers who have died from COVID-19 is just awful. And so we want to use technology to protect those workers. Also, we need to make sure that we can stop the spread of the disease on buses, subway cars, trains. We also want to look at how do we redesign a transit station to make it more contactless? How do we use technology to clean the vehicles? There was a NPR story earlier this morning with the New York MTA using UV light to sanitize the buses and subway cars in New York. And also, of course, we want to provide better access to public transit. We do believe that transit will struggle over the next number of months and years, in particular until we have a vaccine. But there's a population in this country that will still need to use transit, and we want to make sure that they have access to it. The fourth one is to allow state, city, county departments of transportation and public transit to increase deployment of technology, including mobility on demand, to address current COVID-19 transportation mobility challenges, including congestion as the economy reopens and people have to return to work from teleworking. Support greater deployment of technologies to help make streets and bike lanes safer for walking, biking, as communities reconfigure streets to promote social distancing. The sixth theme is provide flexibility to allow state, city, and county departments of transportation, as well as public transit, to expand bike and scooter sharing programs, provide mobility choices, and address first mile, last mile concerns. The seventh one is maintain reductions in greenhouse gases achieved. And this is going to be a tough one. Tim, you spoke to the fact that we're seeing those the greenhouse gases increase again, but we want to do what we can to keep the levels down by increasing investment in electrification, including vehicle infrastructure, expansion of e-cargo cycling and micromobility as well. Increased funding in smart infrastructure and vehicle research to prepare the nation's transportation system for the next pandemic, the next natural disaster, or the next human-made disaster. Research is key. And we've actually have had a number of very good conversations with the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee on research deployment with this COVID-19 situation. The ninth one is enable wider adoption of technology to bring roads, bridges, transit, freight systems, and infrastructure to a state of good repair. These are just the key themes that the task force that they have identified over the last number of weeks. I am sure that we will get more policy themes as we engage the broader membership. And I do want to point that out. That's the key point here. As we did with the FAST Act reauthorization, the sector level calls will be membership wide. And so this is an opportunity for members who may not be as active in the organization to participate in our policy process. Now, I want to be also very clear that when it comes down to policy development and policy approval, that is for the advocacy level trust. That's our policy committee. But this is a real great opportunity for the entire membership to participate in this process. So again, we've talked about the timing in the next couple of weeks with the goal of getting the Smart Infrastructure Task Force a policy document for review. And after that, it would be sent to the board of directors for their review. So that's where we are, Tim.
Thanks, Ron. And I'd appreciate if Amy wants to join in and provide a update on Mobility on Demand Alliance. Of course, Amy is the director of the Mobility on Demand Alliance.
Thanks, Tim. And, you know, Ron went through a lot of the policy focuses that we're looking at the Mobility on Demand Alliance. But I think, you know, one of the things that we're also paying attention to, the rules and regulations behind the scenes of what governs some of this. So the eligibility, for instance, expansion of definition to include mobility on demand options such as micro mobility, microtransit, ride sourcing with our TNC partners and others is critically important. And again, as we look at these different acts, the CARES Act to even the HEROES Act, recognizing that a lot of the way the dollars are flowing through traditional formula funds, which necessarily don't include those eligibilities right now for those types of partnerships. So what you see in the on-demand space is transit agencies, for instance, like I've talked about this before, like Miami, who are surging their drivers to daytime so they can practice social distancing and increased routes and the application of getting more vehicles out there, are doing partnerships with Lyft and Uber in the evening to take care of nighttime rides, but they're using their state and local dollars to do that and not necessarily federal dollars. Or partners like in Detroit where they're actually partnering with foundations to do shuttle rides for essential service workers. So those are the kinds of programs that we're seeing and why we think there needs to be a continued need and the focus on the flexibility. Albeit that the CARES and HEROES Act don't quite apply with how the dollars are being funneled right now. The second side of this also is looking at the behind the scenes pieces of it, areas like Buy America, drug and alcohol testing, some of the other rules and regulations that apply to how federal dollars are included in new on-demand mobility spaces and the way those partnerships are arranged. So a lot of work is being spent and attention is being spent to some of those topics because as we start thinking about coming out of COVID and it's exposed in regards to our new mobility types of partnerships that are really continuing how people move during this time and how they may move as we move out of the COVID period. I think those are important parts of where we want to be able to focus our attention. And you'll see some of this work back through the policy process that Ron was talking about earlier as well. So thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Amy. And can we go to the next slide? I'm going to, cognizant of the time, I'm going to give a very brief update on the 5.9 gigahertz band issue, and then I'm going to open us up for questions and answers. So next slide. As many of you know, most of you, the FCC proposed in December to reallocate 45 megahertz of the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum band for unlicensed devices. We've been fighting this proposal since December, and obviously before that, including meeting with FCC commissioners and staff, drafting comments and reply comments, and developing and engaging with a stakeholder coalition effort that includes transportation safety, emergency response, and bicycle and pedestrian groups, among many others. The FCC is currently reviewing the record that was established by the comments, the reply comments, and the ex parte filings. I will note that through our efforts and the efforts of our partner organizations, we were able to significantly outnumber those that had comments and reply comments on the other side. Our side constituted more than 85% of all comments filed, both in the comment and reply comment period. We expect the FCC is likely to consider the final rule at their July 16 or August 6 meetings. There has been significant interest in from certain FCC commissioners to advance this proposal this summer. And if it moves much past August, it may get delayed due to not wanting to act right before the election. We're continuing to engage with AASHTO, the auto innovators, and our other outside stakeholder group to advocate that the full 75 megahertz be retained for transportation communications. This includes Hill engagement, as well as engagement with the White House and social media engagement. So that's an update on 5.9. We can go to the next slide, and I'd like to invite Ron and Amy to come back and join me for any questions and answer or questions that we may have received throughout the webinar.
Okay, guys, we had one question come in on the 5.9 gigahertz issue. Can you explain what next steps ITS America members can take to help our efforts, to help your efforts?
Sure. So, I think to start with, we're engaging with our stakeholder coalition group. This includes a variety of outside stakeholders that we've been able to get to comment and submit reply comments on the record. We're also engaging with them right now. We have significant support from the transportation committees in the House and Senate, including the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee and the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. But we're still needing to develop support among the committees that have jurisdiction over spectrum and oversight of the FCC. So that would be the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. With Ron's leadership, we had really good hearings with Commerce Committee members in March, and we have gotten some feedback from them, and we'll continue to meet with them in the coming weeks. So that's one area, is if any of our members have relationships with House E&C members or Senate Commerce members, those are really our focus right now. We're happy to provide any support that could be helpful, including talking points or anything else you need to reach out to those members and explain the importance. I'm going to give it to Ron in a second to talk about our efforts with the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, but we're also reaching out to the White House. So if any of the members have relationships with National Economic Council staff or any other staff in the White House, part of our effort is to try to engage with the White House to get them to weigh in on the topic. The FCC is an independent agency, so it isn't as politically sensitive as some of the other agencies, but there is certainly some pressure that the White House could put on the commission. Additionally, we're going to have a social media day. It'll probably be in late June, timed hopefully to coincide with the FCC's final resolution of the issue leading up to their July meeting. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Ron to talk a little bit about what ITS America is doing with Senate Commerce.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So we have had some very good meetings with Senator Cantwell, Washington State, the ranking member of our committee. It's my sense she wants to help us. And so what we're doing right now, working with the autos within our organization, also our state DOTs, in some cases city DOTs, we are helping her by identifying champions on that committee. And so over the next 2 weeks, we'll be meeting with almost every member of that committee to get their support to preserve the spectrum. And most important, though, is with the FAST Act reauthorization under development right now by that committee, we want to make sure that we have policy in the reauthorization that preserves the spectrum. If we can get in the Commerce bill, and that's key, and it's a tall, heavy lift, that will be a major victory. Because quite frankly, on the House side, we know the House T&I committee, they support us, but they don't have the jurisdiction over this issue. That is with the Energy and Commerce Committee. And to get it in the House FAST Act reauthorization, they would need a waiver from the Energy and Commerce Committee, and that's not coming. So all focus right now is on the Senate Commerce Committee. If you have relationships with those members on that committee, let me know. If you are interested in joining us as we go to sit down with the committee, or actually have teleconference calls with that committee now, let me know as well. So that's where we are on that point. There's no easy fix. I want to be very honest with you. Now, there is no easy legislative fix here. This will require a lot of hard work. We're also looking, in addition to the FAST Act reauthorization, we're keeping our eyes on the infrastructure package. Is there a public safety message around the infrastructure package? Last December, as some of you know, we actually looked at the appropriations process to try to get language that would restrict how the FCC can use their dollars. So we're going to look at all those options. All of them are on the table. This is a priority, and we intend to win it.
Thanks, Ron. We also have one more question. Is there any update on the Secretary's first responder grant for CV2X?
I appreciate this question. Unfortunately, we haven't heard anything else from USDOT on the First Responder Safety Technology Pilot Program. This is a program with $38 million in discretionary grant funding that the Secretary Chao announced at the Transportation Research Board's annual meeting in January. And it's intended to deploy V2X technologies on first response vehicles and infrastructure, and actually public transit buses. And we have not seen any more information from USDOT on that. We certainly will update our members when we do see that information come out, and we'll also check in with DOT and see where they are on that program. And if that's all of the questions for today, I want to thank everybody again for joining us. We very much appreciate you taking the time, and be on the lookout for more information from us. We have a great slate of webinars and a variety of programs upcoming, and we look forward to engaging with you all then. So thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon.